Welcome to ACF Chefs Forum. We're excited to have an expert here with information just for you, the leaders and future leaders of the food service industry. You're in for a real treat today as we have an amazing chef presenter who'll be sharing information on fermentation. I'm Jackie Pressinger, American Culinary Federation's Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a very special session live from JJC in Illinois. Today, we'll be taking questions for our featured Master Chef presenter live during the webinar as we are able. Please use the chat function to collaborate with other chefs and students tuning in, and the Q&A function to ask questions to the chef. Okay, so let's get that discussion going in the chat. Please let us know where you're tuning in from today. Let's meet today's featured guest. ACF Certified Master Chef Tim Bucci has been a professor of culinary arts at Joliet Junior College for over a decade and teaching for over 25 years. He has spent over 3 decades working in restaurants, hotels, and schools, which gives him a wide variety of experiences that are advantageous for all of his students' success. Some examples of Chef Bucci's numerous accolades include being a member of ACF Culinary Team USA, earning the title of ACF Educator of the Year in 2009, as well as earning over 60 medals in American Culinary Federation sanctioned competitions, and 30 of those medals were gold medals. I could really go on and on. He's such a talented and accomplished chef, but at this time, please join me in welcoming Master Chef Tim Bucci. Chef, I'm passing the presentation over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have everybody watching. Hopefully you're awake and I won't put you back to sleep. Make sure you have a good cup of coffee with you and keep going. Today we're going to talk about fermentation. It's funny to talk about something that has been trendy for, really just for a few years now, but it's been around for about 10,000 years. Fermentation's been around, in countries really as a method of preservation. And now, we ferment items. It can be because of preservation, especially if you have, produce or dairy in your coolers that you need to preserve so they don't continue to break down and you have to dispose of them. So it can be a method of preservation even for today because of the cost of goods out there today. You cannot put anything into the garbage. Okay, so you always have to think about how we're going to save these products. The thing about fermentation, I've heard of it as a controlled decay. I don't really like to use that terminology, controlled decay. I think any chef doesn't like to hear the word decay or I get it. There are some chefs that do like chocolate soil and I'm fine with that, but the term soil on a menu just sounds a little bit a little odd. So I like to think of this as more of like a controlled preservation or flavor development, because in essence, that's kind of what we're doing when we ferment something. We're developing flavors. Okay, we've been eating preserved items for years, and we may not even know it. Coffee. Okay, vanilla, cocoa, all types of cultured dairy products, vinegars, cheese, sourdough bread, which obviously everybody probably made a loaf of sourdough bread over the pandemic, soy sauce, all these fermented bean paste and shrimp paste and fish paste and miso, and a lot of foods that are really great flavor enhancers. And we'll talk a little bit about koji and the popular shio-koji today, which really shio-koji just started in Japan about maybe 12 to 15 years ago. Koji being around for about 2,000 years or more as a method of preservation. Okay, so with fermentation, you hear the word lacto-fermentation. Okay, which it has nothing to do with dairy, but it has something to do with what's called lactobacillus bacteria. Okay, you have lactobacillus bacteria and molds and yeast that take carbohydrates. Okay, so they feed on the carbohydrates, which then produces carbon dioxide, alcohol, and also acids in the form of lactic acid bacteria. Okay, if you think of just a yeast bread, right? You combine yeast, water, flour. It's going to feed on the sugars in the flour to create carbon dioxide and alcohol. And that's in its simplest form. Now, in fermentation, we're going to be using salt. Salt as a control. So if you make a yeast bread without salt, the yeasts are going to run rampant. Salt is going to slow down that fermentation. So salt has a lot of benefits for fermentation. One, it's going to basically keep harmful bacteria away, okay? It creates an alkaline environment, okay? It doesn't kill bacteria. It basically takes harmful bacteria and through osmosis, okay? So a lot of this flavor development through fermentation has a lot to do with osmosis. So you have harmful bacteria, you have this high salinity or high salt solution on the outside of the bacteria. And because nature wants to create things or make things in balance, bacteria also wants to even out that salinity. So moisture comes out of the bacteria, harmful bacteria, actually kind of collapses and dies, okay? The one bacteria that thrives in a salt solution is lactic acid. And that's what we're producing when we're producing all these different types of fermented items, okay? Lactic acid bacteria. Basically, as I said before, bacteria, yeast, molds, they feed on the carbohydrates, breaking them down into simple sugars, taking glucose and lactose and creating an acid, carbon dioxide, and alcohol. And that's how we're going to preserve those vegetables and keep harmful bacteria away. Now, lacto-fermentation is an anaerobic process. So when anybody talks about bacteria and anaerobic environment, they automatically think of botulism, okay? Botulism does not thrive in a salty environment, okay? Now, today, we're going to focus more on lactic acid fermentation. There's other types of fermentation. There's alcohol or ethyl alcohol fermentation in the production of beer and wine by the use of yeast. There's also acetic acid fermentation in the production of vinegar. Now, one of my students yesterday asked me, well, what's the difference between fermentation and pickling? Today, with fermentation, you start out in an alkaline environment and produce lactic acid to preserve. Where pickling, you start out with an acid, such as a vinegar of many types, to preserve those vegetables. Okay, so the preservation of vegetables and using fermentation and vinegar or acetic acid has been around for years. Okay, now as far as flavor development in fermentation, we talked a little bit about osmosis. So my class yesterday, we produced a few fermentation items. Now, a few of these fermentation items I made over the weekend just to have them ready for today with the help of my fiance. Shout out to my fiance, Shannon, for helping me and dealing with me as far as doing some of these fermented items. So in essence, very simply, we have some basic fermented items here, and I'm going to go take you through the process. This is some fermented pickles, not pickled pickles, okay? So we're not using vinegar or acetic acid. Now, anytime you put a product, it could be a cured meat in a brine, okay? So think of this salt solution as a brine. You have a higher concentration of salt on the outside of the cell walls of the product being cured or brined or fermented. In this case, pickles, okay? Again, by nature wants to create balance, okay? So moisture is going to leave or exit through the cell wall in effort to decrease the salinity outside the cell wall. Now, again, osmosis, nature wants to create balance. So you have a higher concentration of moisture on the outside of the cell wall. It wants to draw those flavors back in. And that's a basic, very quick about the osmosis process in brining and curing a product in a wet environment, a wet saline environment. Okay. Now, we also, when we're talking about fermentation, we're talking about different enzymes breaking down the starches or carbohydrates and proteins. And one of them, which is very, it's a great experiment, not even an experiment, a great product. Okay. So here, this is koji rice. Okay. You could buy koji rice. Okay. Now, koji rice is, has been around for thousands of years in Japan. The fungi Aspergillus oryzae, you in a very quick discussion on koji, you have Aspergillus oryzae, which is a mold or a fungi. You take rinsed and soaked steamed rice that's dry. You dust it with the rice. You keep it covered and in a cloth and plastic, and then you put it in a warm environment. You're trying to create humidity, and you're trying to grow that mold and inoculate that rice. So that's what this is here. You can buy it. You can definitely make it, okay? And you can also purchase the mold for this. Now, koji is used to make miso and sake and soy sauce. But one of the products that have been around for years in Japan is called amazake. There will be a handout with information that I'm talking about today and a little more, and also some recipes for producing amazake, this sweetened rice drink that's been used in Japan for years. Now, what happens? Okay, so this looks like a porridge, something you would eat for breakfast. And it's great. You could drink it just like this. Okay, so this is amazake. This is 1 part ground koji. So I just grind it in a food processor. You don't have to. You can leave it whole. And you mix it with 1 part cooked rice. Okay, and I used sushi rice. You can use jasmine rice. You could use brown rice, which would give you a little bit more nutrients and a little bit more flavor. And this is a sweet amazake. So there's 2 parts water. So 1 part koji, 1 part cooked rice, 2 parts distilled water. If you don't have distilled water, you can also boil water and cool it down to get rid of the chlorine. You can also leave it sit out uncovered overnight, okay? Now, what happens, this is where the amylase enzymes, okay, amylase, which breaks down carbohydrates into glucose and lactose simple sugars. And it becomes this really sweet rice drink that they will consume in Japan. Okay, it has these like earthy, floral, a little bit of like umami characteristic, not a lot. Okay, that's very good for you. It almost tastes like rice pudding with a lot of depth of flavor. Okay. Now, this amazake We can use for marinades. You can use it to replace in baked goods and muffins, to replace some of the liquids in breads, because it gives you another layer of flavor, another dimension of flavor in your product. Okay, so this is not a salted product. Now, what we did was we mixed those ingredients together. We cooked it in a 130 to 140 degree oven, no hotter. Okay, and then we cooked it for 6 hours. You can also put it in like a vacuum bag, but I leave it open and just kind of hang it in a circulator so you can really control that temperature. You don't want to let it get any hotter than that because it'll destroy the mold. Okay, so that's Amazaki. The other one made from koji, which is fairly new, is called shiokoji. Now, shiokoji is what's called salted koji. Okay. And we made this yesterday and cooked it. So when you smell it, it has like floral, little bit of funk, not too much. When you taste it, it has a nice saltiness, but not as salty as before, because as this cooks in the oven, again, at 130 degrees, no hotter than 140 for 6 hours. Could also leave it on a countertop up to 7 days to ferment it. You're growing, you're developing the flavor, because this one has more proteases. So proteases that are going to break down amino acids, break down protein chains into basically chips off amino acids that produce flavors. Okay, this could be used to finish sauces, in dressing. You can use it to replace salt in a recipe, because it has a little bit of that umami. Now, most of the umami or the glutamate and aspartate amino acids, so glutamic acid and aspartic acid, are responsible or are flavor enhancers, right? A lot of people hear about MSG and glutamic acid, but also aspartic acid or aspartates also develops flavor. So if I wanted to use this as a marinade, it works wonders for marinades. So you can marinate meat, and it acts as a tenderizer. Also develops flavor. How does it develop flavor? Again, you have protein. It chips off these amino acids, which then offers or produces different flavor profiles. So all these different flavor profile, these amino acids are going to offer floral and fruity and meaty, which we talk about as far as like umami. Okay, so this shiokoji is great for marinating, putting it on fish, meats, scallops. I've done shrimp. Let them sit for about 1 to 2 days. You could also use it in a powdered form. So this was just ground up koji, just straight koji. And you could dust it on your proteins and let them sit. Now, I've also done it where I didn't rinse off the koji. And like searing a piece of protein, you have to be careful because there's a lot of sugars that develop from the carbohydrates being broken down. When you leave it on like shrimp and scallops, you almost have this like really deep, earthy, sweet, like almost marshmallow-like flavor with the protein. It acts as a tenderizer, okay, because also, like I said, it has protease enzymes that break down the amino acid chains, makes the meat tender also, okay? So some people use it to like brush on roasted chicken and let that chicken sit overnight and then roast that chicken. You do have to be careful because there's a little bit higher sugar content. So you have koji, which we produced shiokoji, we're actually doing a kind of a quick pickle. And what I have here is I just took some cucumbers. Okay, these are little pickling cucumbers. When you're pickling cucumbers, you want to make sure that you cut the blossom end off of the cucumber. Okay, I usually cut both ends off. Plus, you have to make sure it fits into the jar that you're using, and I'll discuss that in a minute. The reason you cut the blossom end off is because it has enzymes that soften the cucumber during fermentation and pickling. Okay, if you look on a jar of, say, Vlasic pickles, they're crunchy, right? But there's also calcium chloride in there. And calcium chloride is going to toughen or firm up the pectins and the celluloses in the vegetable. So if you look on a can of diced tomatoes, they're usually packed with calcium chloride. You could simmer a diced tomato in a soup for 2 to 3 hours. It's still a diced tomato, okay? So you always want to cut that blossom end off. Now, people have put like grape leaves because of the tannins in the grape leaves in a jar of pickles or fermented pickles as a way that breaks down the enzymes that are going to be responsible for softening the pickle. Okay, if you cut the blossom end off, it'll take care of that. You won't need to add any of that. There's also products on the market called pectinase. If you really look at the ingredient, all it is calcium chloride. Okay, so you can save some money. You don't really have to use that. All right, so we'll talk about that in a minute. So what I did here was I took my cucumbers, I tossed it in about 10% salt, and I let it sit for about 30 minutes. And you could see the moisture dripping out of these cucumbers. We're trying to soften them gently, break them down just a little bit, and pull out some moisture. Okay. Now, we have some plain water, and instead of dumping out or rinsing, I'm just going to give these like a little bath to rinse off the salt, almost like you're doing like salad greens, right? And then we pull out these cucumbers to get rid of that salt. Okay. So now we have these kind of softened cucumbers. The salt kind of broke it down, pulled out that moisture. You remember we talked about osmosis, right? So moisture is coming out of those cucumbers to basically dilute the salinity on the outside of those cell walls. So now what you could do, you could take a little bit of garlic. I have just a little bit of fresh garlic here. You can mince up a little bit of fresh garlic. We can add a little bit of fresh dill. And now what we're going to add to this is some of our shio koji. Okay, the salted koji. All right. Shake it up a little bit. You could puree this. I don't mind some of the little pieces from the koji in there. Sometimes, not sometimes. I like to see things in my food, right? You have that visual perception of flavor. And when you see something like herbs and shallots and garlic and little things that makes that food interesting, it's perceptionally like eye appealing, right? So we have that koji. I added about 5% koji. For this, it may be about 8 ounces of cucumbers. I added about a tablespoon of the shio koji. And now we're just going to let that sit. So when you taste this, even if you tasted it now, it's going to have such a wonderful deep flavor. Okay. Now these are cucumbers that I did a few days ago. And I really just let these sit overnight. And you could see how they look like a really aged pickle. Okay. This will happen overnight. Right. So what I would do at this point is I would mix this, put it in a container, put it in a Ziploc bag, and just wrap it up, put it in your refrigerator. You can eat these in about 2 hours. You can also let them sit overnight. They'll develop a little bit more flavor. Now, we have pickled, we have a little shio-koji pickled beets on our menu, which with harder vegetables, you want to slice them thin. So we take them, peel them, we slice them about 1/16 of an inch, salt them, drain them, toss them in the shio-koji, and let them sit overnight. And we're using that on our salad instead of doing a pickled item. And I love doing pickled items. I love the tanginess, the flavor it offers, the spark. But this is another way to add something that is a little bit more interesting or different than another pickled vegetable. Nothing against pickled vegetables. But now we can use the shio-koji as a flavoring and offer a little bit of that umami characteristic as well. Okay, so that's koji. Now, as far as regular fermentation, okay, we talked about types of fermentation, amylase, protease, salt. We talked about salt, osmosis. Salt is going to kill off some of the harmful bacteria, creates an alkaline environment. And now we're going to start to ferment. Okay, so what we're doing in the beginning, we're taking and breaking down the carbohydrates, killing off bacteria. And then the second stage is we're developing that lactic acid. So we kill off harmful bacteria. We start converting the carbohydrates to sugars into lactic acid bacteria. And then the pickle goes through an aging process, or the ferment goes through an aging process. So these cucumbers, we just put them in with a little bit of dill, peppercorn, and garlic. It's actually a super delicious pickle. It doesn't have that sourness, but it has that slight tanginess, okay? So this is another way to add just a little variety instead of doing a traditional pickle. We also have some pickled corn here. Now, corn, sweet corn, this is not really the season for corn, but you can kind of see that fermentation going on, right? You see that lactic acid bacteria working on those sugars and converting the sugars into carbon dioxide and alcohol. Now, we're not creating alcohol to the point where you're going to drink this and get drunk. You're creating very small amounts of alcohol, but you do see that. And when you taste this corn has this slightly salty, sweet, a little bit tangy. Now, some people like to use the term funky, and I guess I'm okay with that because like sauerkraut is kind of funky, and that's fine. But now you can take this and you could make a nice fermented corn salsa, a relish with this, okay? It could go into a salad with different vegetables or grains and do a nice corn and tomato salad with black beans and cilantro and lime. So there's a lot of uses for this, okay? We're not just fermenting just for the sake of fermenting an ear of corn. Now, you might have some extra corn in your cooler. You have no use for it. You can do, obviously you can make soups and things like that, but you can also ferment it. And then you can put this in your refrigerator and it's going to last for months, okay? It's going to last for a long time. Now, we also have some fermented bell peppers. And just to show you, I mean, we could really ferment anything. Okay, so the bell peppers, we put some garlic, some red chili flake. My students love this because they like spice, right? So if they can get their hands on a habanero or a jalapeno or a serrano, they want to put that in everything. But we did a fermentation class yesterday, and I banned them from using a chili in every single vegetable, just so that we can adapted to our menu without, hurting somebody. But you could see how it breaks down, but there's still some nice texture to this, okay? Now, the one thing, let's see, we also have some sauerkraut. So that's doing very nicely. I'm gonna show you that in a second, okay? Now, when you start fermenting, you have to have the right vessel, okay? I'm using some glass jars. You could do it in a hotel pan, like a 6-inch 6-pan. It's something that is non-reactive, okay? If you're going to use a glass jar, make sure you use like a canning jar because you are developing gases, okay? You just don't want to use any kind of a glass jar, which could possibly explode, especially when you're doing some kind of a soda or something that has a lot more gas development. Like that corn had a lot of action just going the next day. Some of the other vegetables, the red pepper took maybe about 2 days to really start getting active. The cabbage took a few days, okay? Now, if you are just using a lid and a cap, every day you kind of have to burp it. So it doesn't make it too strong, okay? Now, there's other ways you can go about that without having to burp. Now, this is tepache. This is a Mexican pineapple drink. We made this yesterday. You can actually see in one night that we're starting to create some lactic acid bacteria, some fermentation. Now, what we put on top of here is just these little like burping caps, right? So every now and then, a little bit of carbon dioxide will kind of be released. You're not going to see it. You're not going to hear it. The corn, on the other hand, if I didn't put the jar on tight enough, you can hear it hissing. That because of all the sugars in the corn, that's producing that carbon dioxide and alcohol. Okay, so tepache, delicious Mexican pineapple drink. We kind of modified it a little bit. We put a little bit of habanero. We use brown sugar instead of piloncillo, which is a Mexican style brown sugar. It's not brown sugar. It's a pure cane sugar. We added some other flavorings, some cinnamon and other spices. And then we'll let this ferment and then we'll drain it off. And that'll be a nice little pineapple drink. You can actually serve that as part of like almost like an amuse. You can do like different type of drinks as like just a little shooter, as a way of a palate cleanser, just something fun and a little bit different. Okay. Another way to keep your product burping. So, the one thing with, in some of my classes, not all my classes, is I like to give my students a little bit of freedom, not too much. Okay. The further we go into the program, give them a little more freedom. So this is a fermented strawberry, pineapple, blueberry. I'm not sure what they were thinking here, but I know they put some ginger in this. They put some other spices and salt and the distilled water. So we kind of let them run with it. We'll see what happens, right? Now, this is an airlock. Okay, so you can get these caps that have a little airlock. You remove this cap, you fill it with water. You could just use plain water. That will not let air into the product. Again, we want to keep it in an anaerobic environment, but it will let air out. It's almost like a backflow device on a pipe, okay? Water can go one way, but water can't go the other way. Okay, so that's another way to keep it from having to burp the product. Now, we have to keep the item submerged. So you can purchase these little weights, little fermentation weights. One of my students was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And I'm like, "Don't even think about taking it." He's like, "That'd be a nice paperweight." So a little fermentation weight. You can also buy these springs. So when you put the cap on, it pushes the vegetable down. Another method is to put your product, take a Ziploc bag, fill it with water, and that helps to keep your product submerged. Okay, you leave it open, but it also gives some room for the carbon dioxide to be released. Okay. All right. So now we have some cucumbers. Okay. And again, as I said, we're going to cut that blossom end off. Now, what I'm doing here is a brine ferment. Okay. Using salt and water, distilled water. Okay. So we have our jar. We're going to start putting our cucumbers or our carrots or cauliflower or corn or strawberries or blueberries or parsnips or turnips or daikon radish. The possibilities are endless. Okay. Now we can put in a little bit of garlic. And I just kind of crushed the garlic and threw it in. You'd be surprised how much flavor you can get out of that. I have some dill. And I also have some peppercorns. Now, there's a really great way to figure out how much salt you need, okay? What I'm going to do is take my jar. I'm going to zero it out, tear it out. I'm going to put my jar back on, or you can tear it out and then add the cucumbers on top. And we're going to add our distilled water to the jar to cover the products, okay? Now, we have 430 grams. A good ratio for brine fermented products is 2 to 3% salt to distilled water, okay? So 2 to 3%. Cucumbers, I tend to go on the higher side, like 2.75 to 3, because there's more moisture in there. Carrots, I'll go 2% because you're not getting a lot of moisture released from the vegetable. You'll get some, but not that much, okay? So then what we do is it was 430 grams. We take it times 0.03, which is about 12 grams, right? Right. Okay, so we're going to take some kosher salt. Now, you can also use sea salt. You don't want to use iodized salt. Sea salt's a little bit more expensive, but I'm using kosher salt. So I'm doing about almost 13 grams. And then we're going to take our water. I'm not weighing anymore. I'm just adding the water. Taking our salt and our distilled water and just kind of swirling that around, making sure that salt is dissolved. So that's our brine. And now it goes back in here. And if there's still little remnants of salt, it will continue to dissolve. And if you want, you could put one of your water lock lids, and then we can take that off, fill it with a little water. I'm using just distilled water. You can just use regular water, and then let that sit at room temperature. You don't have to worry about bacteria. Now, lactic acid is a salt-tolerant bacteria, okay? So the salt is not going to destroy that bacteria, okay? So we just leave that sit out 65 to 75 degrees. If your kitchen is cold, then what I have done is I've taken like a pan and putting it on my stove, putting my products there, and just keep the light on if you have a light above your stove, just in a warm environment. I've heard people putting it on heating pads, and I think that's going a little extreme. You know, it's funny. Preservation has been around for thousands of years. Even before science knew what we were doing, right? So if you're making kimchi in Korea and you have this big crock and you're salting the cabbage and draining the moisture and then making this paste of Korean red chili flake and grated Asian pear and maybe dried shrimp or shrimp paste and fish sauce and other flavorings and packing it and then burying it in a ground. I don't think they were really talking about lactic acid bacteria back then. They knew it worked. They knew the salt preserved it. Okay. So I think sometimes we can overthink things to the point where it just like takes over our mind. Okay. So you don't really have to overthink this. Now, that was a brine ferment. This is some cabbage. This is a dry ferment, a salted dry ferment. So what does that mean? I'm just taking shredded cabbage. It could be shredded carrots, shredded beets, shredded root, any kind of root vegetable, and take the salt. And now for this, I'm using about 1.5 to 2% salt for the weight of my product. So in the brine, it was salt, 2 to 3% salt as a percentage of the liquid and the weight of the vegetable. Okay. You want to let this sit and kind of knead this. Okay. Because you could see I'm getting some moisture developing, right? Because the salt is because of osmosis and it's collapsing the cell walls. Now we can make our sauerkraut. So shredded cabbage. Now, if I wanted to, I could speed up the process a little bit. I could put a little bit of grated apple in here. I could put a little bit of grated pear because that sugar is going to promote that acid development, that fermentation. Okay. And you could do a nice apple kraut. You could do an apple and zucchini kraut the same way. Okay. And for that, I would probably do about 2% salt because you're going to get a lot of moisture out of the zucchini. So what happens is you want to make sure you have enough salt to prevent harmful bacteria from forming. So you might say, well, I don't want to use that much salt. I'm going to cut it down to 0.5%. There, you got to be a little bit careful. Okay, you got to be a little careful that you're using enough salt. Okay, so now we take a jar and we'll start. Now these jars have been cleaned and sanitized. Okay. You know, they sell like little cabbage muddlers, you know, something like you would use for a mojito. I just grabbed a little plunger from a KitchenAid. You could use your hands, any type of plunger to get this cabbage compressed into this jar. And you'd be surprised how much you could fit into this jar. Okay. Now there's still some moisture in the bottom of that bowl. So let's get that moisture, that brine that we've developed. Okay. Okay, so you see, as I press on this, let me just clean up a little bit here. You could see moisture coming up, okay? We can use one of our fermentation weights to press that. And there you have your cabbage for your sauerkraut, okay? So that's, sauerkraut, you can let it go, 5 days if you want it very mild, right? If you don't want too much of that funk going on. You can let it go for 2 years if you wanted to. It really depends on the flavor you're looking for as far as these fermented items. Minimum about 4 days. Corn, like I said, that started, but the flavor really wasn't there. So depending on the flavor profile you're looking for, You can let them ferment longer. Now, you can add, okay, so once you understand the process of fermentation, you can start adding different flavor profiles and ingredients, toasted caraway seed, or some crushed juniper berries and allspice berries in this sauerkraut with some apple, okay? You could do fermented apple. You could do a fermented apple sauce. So lactic acid has great beneficial bacteria that promotes gut health, right? Has billions of microbes, good microbes that's going to help promote gut health. Fermentation produces certain vitamin Bs, B12, folic acid, biotin, vitamin K. It stabilizes vitamin C. It doesn't produce vitamin C. It breaks down like proteins to make them more easily digestible. Somebody who might be lactose intolerant could usually stand or handle like a Greek yogurt because that's a cultured dairy product. Eating sourdough bread, those who can't digest gluten or protein, I'm not saying celiac, can usually stand something like sourdough bread since it's more of a fermented product, okay? So you can let these stand as long as you want. You can add all kind of flavors, garlic, shallots, onions, spices, toasted spices. I like to toast my spices beforehand to really make their flavors pop. Now, yesterday, we made some yogurt. Super simple, you know? There's a recipe in the packet I gave you. We took about 3 tablespoons of yogurt. We added it to some milk, and we let it sit in a warm environment. And now we have this beautiful homemade yogurt, okay? And this is kind of a method of like back slopping. Like I could take some of this brine and add it to a new batch of pickles. Now, I might still add a little bit more salt because you got to be careful. If you keep doing that, the salinity of that brine gets diluted. But I can take some of this yogurt and add it to milk to create more yogurt. My mom, when she lived in Sicily, you know, they used to, like a lot of people do, they make bread dough. They put a piece aside, cover it, let it sit overnight or 2 days, almost like a sourdough. And then they would use it to make bread the next day or the next day after that. Now, this whey that's developing, you can add that to your fermented products. As the lactose in the whey, the sugar starts breaking down and converting into lactic acid bacteria. And that's really what we've done here. I love using whey, the byproduct of cheese making, in sauces. Sometimes I'll do like a truffle whey emulsion because it's another way to add a different tang or sourness to a dish and utilizing a product that most people throw away, okay? Now, I have some cauliflower here, all right? We're gonna ferment a little cauliflower, one more. We'll tear out our jar. Now, I'm very big into utilization of product, okay? I will utilize as much as the product as I can. On one of our menu items, we have a celery root crumble that's produced from the celery peel, okay? This cauliflower leaves, now I love the cauliflower core, but I asked my students, what would they do with this? And they say they would throw it away. And most people would. We actually cook all this till it's really nice and tender, drain it. And we adapted a tuile batter with a little curry powder, and we make a cauliflower tuile to garnish our cauliflower soup. Now there's apple in that dish. The peels get dehydrated. We turn it into a powder. We dust the tuile. So now we have a cauliflower and apple tuile that goes on our cauliflower and apple soup. Okay, so that's how we have to think today. We have to think about how are we going to preserve the product because everything is so expensive. We were joking yesterday in class that an egg, if you work in a breakfast restaurant, that your egg menu price is going to have market price next to it. 2 eggs over easy, market price, right? Like a lamb would, or a lobster would have years ago. So we have our cauliflower. Going to add our distilled water again to cover. Thankfully, we are at the same amount, so I don't have to think too hard. We're at 440 grams, so we're at a little bit over 12 grams of salt, so that makes it easy for me. We'll add the water, tear it out. We're going to add our salt. Now, you can also do it in a bowl, okay? Just dissolve that salt.
Chef, we do have a few questions coming in too.
Yes.
You might be able to take some. If you're ready, one of the questions has to do with how to store these ferments in a restaurant environment. Do they need to be in the cooler? And they're saying that their local health department is requiring a HACCP plan to be approved. So wondering if you had any insights.
I haven't had any of our personal health inspectors say anything about our fermented vegetables. Certainly at room temperature. I think part of it, you have to educate the health inspectors on some of these. I use the quotes, but these new techniques that we're doing a lot in restaurants. About 10 years ago, I did a seminar for health inspectors on sous vide, and a lot of them didn't really know about it. So yes, creating a HACCP plan is always the best thing to have on hand, from the start of receiving. Once these vegetables are fermented, they are perfectly fine sitting out for about 4 to 5 days, okay, because of the lactic acid bacteria. I would label them, I would date them, when they were produced. And then once they develop that flavor, you can go ahead and put them in your cooler and store them in your cooler, and they're fine for months. It's just like any pickle that you're storing, okay? Sometimes it's educating them and making them aware of what's going on. I watched this video of this lady. It was, she was a nun, and the show on Netflix was called Cooked, and she was making cheese, and she always made her cheese in wooden barrels. She always started her cheese in wooden barrels, and the health inspector had a problem with that. So when they switched to stainless steel, the cheese wasn't coming out right. So she worked with the health inspector to make them understand that in this barrel is filled with lactic acid microbes, lactobacillus bacteria, all these microbes in the wooden barrel. Think of wine being aged in barrels. And so they actually allowed that. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen in your county, but we also, like I said, I think the best thing is to educate your health inspectors and make sure they understand that it is safe. Creating a HACCP plan is also a good backup plan to have, and make sure that they see that you're taking action. I think taking action is the key. Okay. Hopefully I answered that question.
Absolutely. Yes. And we did have another viewer who's wondering if you could use ground koji and distilled water mixture on the outside of a salami before hanging, similar to brushing with a mold 600.
You can. Okay. And that's a great question. Whoever answered that, pat yourself on the back. So one quick thing. So here I'm making just like a fermented curried cauliflower. Okay. And this is how, we can have some fun with this, right? Use this as a garnish in salads and so forth. So to lead up to that, and I'm going to talk about that. Yes, what we did here, we vacuum packed, and you don't technically have to if you don't have a vacuum machine and a steamer. You could definitely simmer these very slowly. Don't boil them, because you want to cook them evenly. We cooked, these are parsnips and beets. We also did some whole carrots, peel. Now, when I'm fermenting vegetables, I don't peel my vegetables. I wash them very well. Organic is best, but there's a lot of beneficial bacteria and yeast on the outside of that, okay? So we cooked these vegetables. We tossed it in a cure. Now, the recipe is going to be attached with your handouts. A salt and spice cure. We're going to cure these for about 2 to 5 days. Next week, we're going to dry them off. We're going to take our koji rice. We're going to mix it with rice powder, and we're going to dust it on these vegetables. So kind of the same process with the salami, okay? You would take your lacto-ferm 600 mold, incubate it for 12 hours or so, spray it on your salami, and then incubate it in a warm area with moisture, okay? We're going to do the same thing with this, with the koji, and then we're going to hang it in our curing chamber, just like you would salami, and we're actually going to attempt to make, now this goes against all my Sicilian roots, a vegetarian or a vegetable charcuterie product. And I don't know if I'll really call it vegetable charcuterie on a menu, but to offer a guest a vegetarian charcuterie board without just having, here's some cheeses and nuts and dried apricots, and here's a couple little things for your crostini. That's kind of not to me a vegetarian. If you could offer a fermented vegetable product that mimics the depth of flavor of a really well salami, I'm going to try it. I'm hoping that it really works out. Now, as far as that question, you can use koji. You don't necessarily have to use a mold on your salami when you dry them. The mold does a couple things, right? It keeps the air as it develops, that white mold, keeps the light away from the pork fat, which can turn rancid and oxidize with the light. It also kind of, on a salami, it also kind of keeps away some of the harmful bacteria by taking up space. So yes, you can definitely use the koji. I might, because a casing is usually fairly dry. Try mixing it with a distilled water and brushing it. I would probably do an experiment. I don't think it's going to be harmful in any way. The product will still dry as long as you don't have like case hardening or anything like that. But I think that's a great question, and I would definitely try it as far as some really awesome flavor development. Okay. One more thing I just want to show you. These are, and there's a recipe for this. Now these, I'm just going to reach in here. These are nukazuki, okay, which is Japanese rice bran pickles. You have a recipe using rice bran or ground up oat. What I did was, and I just wanted to experiment, I bought some of the nukadoku, which is, nukadoku is the fermented rice bran already done. So you can get it in a bag, ground up. It's rice bran that's already fermented, and you just add water. This was a daikon yesterday, and look at that. One night, okay? One night. We put carrots in here. Pickles, the cucumbers are going to take longer, and I tried one earlier. You can rinse it off. I think it's good just like that. I probably rinse it off for my customers. Super delicious. So we can make shiokoji. We can make amazaki. We can do fermented. And sometimes, we don't have as much time. Maybe you can buy a pre-made starter culture like the fermented rice bran to start your fermented products. And you can use this a couple more times to get more yield out of it. Okay. Again, on a charcuterie board, on a salad, using those products. super delicious.
Absolutely
Right?
amazing. My goodness, chef, I'm sure we could all be here all day and learn so much more about fermentation. I think we've just scratched the surface, but we are coming close to the end of our time. And I
Yes.
just wondered if you had any final words for the chefs and culinary students tuning in.
Well, yes. Don't be afraid. Okay. Don't be afraid. Clean, sanitary, work clean and sanitary. Have fun with this. Have fun and experiment. One of your ferments may not come out great. I've done that many times. Okay. Sometimes ferments are not for everybody. Some of these are acquired tastes, especially from some in different countries where they're fermenting like shark for years, and it just tastes horrible. But it's an acquired taste. But have fun. Have fun with it. Give your guests something different on a menu. Add flavors. Okay. It's all about excitement, preservation, utilizing product. Okay. I don't know if there's any more time for any questions. I know I have a tendency to talk too much, but if there's any like really true questions, I can get those answered. No, maybe.
Sure. Well, we did have lots of great questions, but I think it just speaks to maybe we'll have to do a part 2 at some point.
Maybe.
In the near future. But thank you all for tuning in again. A huge round of applause as we thank Master Chef Tim Bucci for sharing his time and his skills and inspiration today. I know I learned a lot. So we can't thank you enough. You're just a master of the craft. And I know that all of the culinary students and professionals tuning in very much appreciated it. If you haven't seen the ACF Chefs Forum webinar on charcuterie that we did with Chef Tim Bucci a couple of months ago, please go to the ACF Online Learning Center or our YouTube page to check it out. It's amazing. And please be on the lookout for the survey that you'll receive tomorrow along with Chef's recipe packet. You'll need to complete the survey in order to earn your 1 hour of CEH. We do have some great webinars coming up. On Monday, we'll be covering healthcare food service flavor trends, and then we'll have a very sweet session that you don't want to miss. On February 6th, we will welcome Jesse Jackson III for a Valentine's themed demo on pas de choux live from the Culinary Institute of America. Please visit acfchefs.org and click on the events tab now to register for ACF National Convention in Las Vegas. And educators, mark your calendars. Our first ever ACF Culinary Educator Summit will be held right at the beginning of convention on July 16th at the New Orleans Convention Center. On behalf of the ACF National Office, thank you again for tuning in. Thank you to Chef Bucci for this delicious learning opportunity. And we hope to see you all in Las Vegas soon. Thank you, everyone.